Welcome to another edition of Voice of the Diaspora. The Venezuela Guyana border controversy is the topic of the day. Many Guyanese believe that the current regime, PPP regime, is not handling the controversy, the looming controversy, in the correct manner. In studio with me today is a prominent attorney at law, Nigel Hughes, who was a former, who is a former chairman of the Alliance for Change, AFC, that would have formed the last coalition government. Nigel Hughes will give his perspective in its entirety on that controversy, what is happening in Guyana at the moment in relation to Venezuela's impending threat. Nigel Hughes, welcome to Voice of the Diaspora.
Good morning. I suspect it's afternoon where you are, Norman.
It is.
Thank you very much for your very warm welcome. It's a privilege and honor to be on your program, and I will share whatever little knowledge I have on these matters.
Well, many people look forward to your expert advice on a lot of issues in Guyana, both locally and international issues that affect us. You are a prominent attorney at law, but you've also been a prominent voice when it comes to our country, its politics, its culture, its social dimensions, and so on. And so you are not someone that the country does not know. You are, as I said, a very prominent figure in your legal expertise, and outside of that, you have been the chairman of the Alliance for Change. So you have had your touch with politics in Guyana. We will, of course, discuss later on whether there will be a return to active politics. But Mr. Hughes, we have a situation in Guyana at the moment. Venezuela has raised its head again. This controversy has been raging, I think, since the 1800s. I would like you to give us your view of a brief view of the history of this thing, because many of my viewers do not understand totally what is really happening. A brief history of what is happening with this controversy, what has happened, and what is happening today in relation to Venezuela raising its head again. I understand that there's a presence at our borders by the Venezuelan military. I understand that there will be a referendum in December where Venezuela will ask their people to pronounce on whether Guyana should be, whatever. Nigel, welcome again. It's your debut here. I would like to give you the opportunity to speak on this very, very serious controversy.
Thank you very much, Norman. Let me start off by saying I am not quote unquote an expert international lawyer, but I will certainly share the facts that are available, I think, to everybody. Before Guyana became independent, we were a British colony. We were a British colony since around 1815, after the Europeans had finished that set of wars they had in Europe. And one of the issues that arose prior to 1899 was, of course, the determination of the boundaries between Venezuela and what would have been British Guyana. So that's the western boundary. There was a gentleman called Mr. Schomburg who had identified the boundaries. A commission was set up and he identified the boundaries between Guyana, Brazil, and Venezuela. The Venezuelans, because of their long occupation west of present-day Guyana, had a view that for some reason the waters of the Essequibo were included in Venezuela. As you know, just to give you an example, if we go further south, Brazil, the reason why the boundary between Brazil and Guyana is where it is because the waters of the Amazon, all the rivers and tributaries that led to the Amazon considered Brazil, and all the rivers and tributaries that led to the Essequibo River were considered Guyana, and that's why the Takatu River is the boundary between Guyana, because the Rupununi River, for example, flows into the Essequibo at the confluence at Apateri. Similar sort of principle applied, and in 1899 they went to arbitration. Venezuela was represented by two persons. The Brits were represented, and they finalized the boundary between British Guyana and Venezuela. And that boundary was accepted, and in international language, it was perfected. There were two subsequent notations in relation to the location of the boundary, which was accepted by Venezuela. The president at the time signed off on that and accepted that as the um, final determination of the boundary between Guyana and Venezuela. As the story goes, posthumously, Venezuelan ambassador, they published notes from Venezuelan ambassador who said that he had been subject to undue influence by the Americans to, in effect, sacrifice Venezuela's interests. Not much attention was paid to that. However, as we drew closer to the 1959, as you knew, Cuba became uh, aligned to the Russians. There was the uprising, Fidel, and the rest. And the Americans were very concerned, especially after the missile crisis, about the presence of very left wing governments in their backyard. Monroe Doctrine from the 1800s said that essentially everything that was south of the United States border was considered the backyard of the United States, and that all international, other foreign international countries, foreign as in non-American, should not intervene in this area. This was their sphere of influence. So, as you know, we had two left wing leaders. We had Mr. Chetty Jagan, who was a professed communist, and he was joined by Mr. Burnham, who was not a communist, but certainly had very strong left leaning policies. So immediately I anticipate that in the assessments that were taking place in Washington at that time, as you know, the world was bipolar, it was split between the USSR and the Americans in the West. They were very concerned, particularly given the statements made by Dr. Jagan about Guyana becoming a second Cuba. Um, I don't think they got much comfort from the fact that Mr. Burnham was left of center as well, but of the two persons that they had to deal with, that they would have preferred, I believe, in those circumstances, Mr. Burnham. So all of a sudden, when the question of independence, and the question of independence for Guyana didn't come in isolation, because the British knew from the time the Mau Maus were rising up in Kenya, the Indians were rising up in India, and generally they knew that this British Empire, which they said the sun never set on, was they would have to give up independence. But of course, like any responsible government, they were concerned about influence after they gave it up and who would run it. So what happened is, as the British were handing over their control, quote unquote, of this part of the world to the Americans, they needed leverage, not the British, but the Americans certainly needed leverage, I believe. And none of this I can specifically point to a document, so I do want to enter that caveat. But I think what happened is this border problem surfaced just before independence as a means by which, if for some reason Guyana went rogue, it would be a basis upon which um, uh, any new regime in Guyana would have to deal with what is a very serious issue. Venezuela was long independent, long had superior military capacity. And so they signed an accord, I think it was called the Geneva Accord, I can't remember, that they would use their good offices to try and settle this dispute in relation to the border. And I think it's important at this point that we understand that that accord did not set aside or purport to set aside the 1899 agreement. However, Venezuela had asserted that this was their territory based on the notes of their ambassador. We signed that off. Guyana got independence in 1966, and things were going well. And of course, as you know, the government of the day was left leaning, and this began to surface again as an issue as we became more and more left-leaning. And of course, Venezuela reasserted their interests. The good officer process went absolutely nowhere. I think they might have changed 3 or 4 sets of good officers on either side. Nothing happened whatsoever. There, Venezuela again went through the saber rattling before. You remember Dave Martins, I think, around the time when it became an issue, produced that very popular Guyanese song, "We Not Give Not a Blade of Grass," and of course, at the time, the um, the president of the day, Mr. Burnham, had developed. There were, I think, 3 military or paramilitary organizations: the Ghana Defense Force, we had the People's Militia, and we had the National Service. Um, these were all intended. The Ghana Defense Force clearly had a very clear mandate to defend the territory and integrity of Guyana, but also at the citizen level, the People's Militia was intended to empower and train our citizens for any eventuality, not just Venezuela. And we had, I think, I think credit was always to be given to Mr. Burnham, that he realized that this was not a dispute that could be settled militarily, and Guyana embarked upon an exceedingly robust international defense. First of all, education of the issue, and secondly, a defense to the extent that Venezuela at one stage actually was on the retreat, because everywhere they went, whether it was in the Northern Line movement, whether it was in the South to South movements that they have, this issue was raised, sorry, as a primary issue, and it was a result of the tremendous efforts of a fantastic diplomatic team that we had at the time, that this was a real issue, and Venezuela had to, forgive me, had to retreat, certainly on the diplomatic front. And I think it was because of Mr. Burnham's identification of the fact that we needed to have an exceedingly strong foreign service and diplomatic effort to be able to protect the territorial integrity, um, that we caused Venezuela to back off temporarily. It was very effective, not even temporarily, for a sustained period of time. It was very effective. The entire movement, as you know, Guyana was extremely progressive then. We were fighting the non-aligned movement. We had the African states. We had a lot of the Latin American states. And we were managed to characterize Venezuela for what it was, as a, well, I suppose in colloquial terms, a bully attempting to take 5/8 of this country, in which it was developing. Um, I think it is noteworthy that a lot of the governments in Venezuela during that period of time were right-wing governments. Things changed. Mr. Chavez won, and of the 2 entities in political entities in in Venezuela, and I do want to say between Maduro and whoever else is on the other side, the political entity that is likely to be more sympathetic to the political objectives of Guyana and the third world is likely to be the Maduro regime. If the right wing government gets in, you're going to get a far more, even more, I should say, aggressive position. But we'll come to that later.
Okay.
The good offices processes didn't go anywhere. Um, I think we had a change in government in 1992. I'm not sure what emphasis was then placed on the continuation of this very strong and robust defensive elements that had been efforts, sorry, that had been commenced internationally and globally, and to keep our friends updated in what was happening. You know, we discovered oil in 2015. That completely changed the dynamics not only of Guyana, but it changed the geopolitical dynamics of the importance of Guyana. So Guyana was never geographically important in terms of, you know, it's sitting on some great waterway or strategic location, but certainly the amount of oil that was publicly declared in 2015 changed our dynamics. Now, I think perhaps naively, we did not appreciate collectively as a country that we would automatically, as a result of those discoveries, be playing at a different league. This was not a league in which we would have the same degree of influence about the development of the country as we would otherwise have had, because now we're talking about a very important resource in the world,
Yeah, yeah.
political resource. We're talking about oil. We're talking about really large amounts of money, and of course, serious geographic influence. Now, if you come from a country that is as small as ours and has had virtually very little experience with dealing with that kind of statecraft, you better get up to speed pretty quickly. I think collectively we have not done that, and we didn't appreciate the significance. Venezuela, of course, after Chavez was succeeded by Maduro, and they were left wing, and of course, the United States government implemented a series of sanctions against them. And insofar as Venezuela was subject to sanctions, and we continued to discover oil in the quantities we did in Guyana, we were sitting pretty, or so we thought. We should have realized a couple of things. One, is that there's no regime that ever remains in power forever. So, what was our position in the event that there was a regime or is a regime change in Venezuela? As we know, Venezuela has far more oil reserves than Guyana. It certainly was, I think, it has the largest oil reserves in the world. And that means that you have to put into context the influence and significance of that kind of find. So, what happens if there's a regime change in Venezuela? Things go back to normal in Venezuela. Will our international friends who are sitting next to us at the moment have the same perspective on Guyana? Because if you compare Guyana's resources with that of Venezuela, on a sheer monetary basis, it may well be at some stage that backing Venezuela becomes a far more I don't want to say profitable,
Lucrative venture.
lucrative enterprise, especially in the areas of decision making globally. I'm not talking about Canada. And what is our plan in those circumstances to make sure that we are heard and that we are not we don't end up on the wrong end of the stick where all of a sudden the Venezuelan claims to Essequibo suddenly become a little bit more acceptable, and there isn't that extent of objection globally amongst our friends. As you know, Prime Minister Mia Mottley recently in Barbados, who I think is a good friend of our president, facilitated the execution of an agreement between the Maduro government and the opposition, which resulted in a reduction in the amount of sanctions against Venezuela, which means that Venezuela's economic prospects are going to come back. And that agreement covered certain electoral issues in Venezuela, reforms. So, what happens if as a result of these reforms, Mr. Maduro is voted out, and you get a very right wing, very nationalistic government in Venezuela? And even Mr. Maduro has, as a result of calling for a referendum on the 3rd of December, he has significantly upped the rhetoric in Venezuela for the acquisition of Essequibo, as in the physical acquisition of it, while there are proceedings going on before the ICCJ. Forgot to mention that. And one of the questions I'm sure we're going to discuss is what is likely to happen after that referendum on the 3rd of December, because politically, as you know, it's going to be very difficult if he gets a resounding response to the 5 questions in that referendum. If all of them say Venezuela should retake the territory, politically, what is he going to do? Is this going to be a fillip for him to attempt to take Essequibo? I don't think the attempt would be to take the whole of Essequibo, but just like Ankoko, they took the eastern half of the island. They may be, for example, I'm not saying this is going to happen, they take Ettering back and they put in troops in Ettering back. How are we dealing with that? It's been very, very late in the debate. Suddenly have discovered that we are in real danger in relation to Essequibo. So we're now scrambling on the back foot, trying to gain sort of support uh, internationally, which we should have been doing continuously since then. And of course, as you know, Guyana is completely divided along political, which means ethnic lines. And I saw a video maybe a day or two ago where a high-ranking political leader of the government was, well, let me say, Venezuelan says he had a meeting with a high-ranking member of the government who assured him that the supporters of the government were not hostile to him, but the opposers of the government had some sort of hostility towards them, which essentially is a xenophobic invitation, and that's an issue. What we've had recently is a significant increase in the number of people coming into Guyana who are Venezuelan. Those numbers are as high as 100,000, 115,000, depending on who you listen to. And there appears to be no program for addressing this. Dr. Gary Best recently, I think you might have had him in your program, I'm not sure, but Dr. Gary Best recently raised the possibility of how will we address if there are more Venezuelans than Guyanese in the territory of Essequibo, and they call for a referendum, and these Venezuelans vote to join Venezuela. It doesn't mean that legally it's binding, but what it does mean is that you have a real crisis, because you will then have people who are numerically the majority in that part of the world who are Venezuelan. I understand in some villages, some communities in the Northwest, the number of Venezuelans match the number of Guyanese. How are we dealing with all these issues? But I'm sorry, I'm rambling on here, but I hope that has
No,
given
you're
you
not, Nigel. You're not. And we will get to that position that you said there in the latter part in terms of what is happening with our local politics in dealing with Venezuelans coming into Guyana and how we will deal with those issues. But you have actually extrapolated a very frightening dimension in relation to Venezuela garnering the sympathy from international communities that would have been supportive of Guyana in the past, based on what is happening at the moment. That it's the first time I've heard that. I had Dr. Hines on this show, and of course I will play a clip for you to respond. But I'm glad that you delve into our government's and opposition's involvement in this thing at the moment. And I want you to outline clearly whether you're satisfied with what is happening. We are aware, as you said, that a lot of Venezuelans are coming into Guyana. Migrants. Venezuela is going through a lot at the moment. America's embargo. People are going hungry. There's no food on the shelves, and they're making a claim. Nigel, I want to ask you this question before we go to that, though. Do you believe that is the giving away of the oil blocks by the PPP government that would have been a significant part of causing Venezuela to raise its head again and to place troops on our borders and to be going in December for a referendum?
I certainly think that the placing of those oil blocks onto the international market for the invitation for bids has contributed significantly. Venezuela's position in relation to Essequibo, both in terms of the land mass as well as the offshore, has always been to international, and this is their position to international investors who've attempted to come into Venezuela, into Guyana, has always been to warn them, don't come to Guyana, in terms of investing in Essequibo. I certainly think after we had the significant discovery of oil, most of those discoveries are on the eastern side of the Stabroek Block, except one, which I think is Rachel. I certainly think we certainly had no need to put those blocks up for auction now. So this was not part of any, and as you know, we don't have any long-term developmental plans that are shared with the population. We only hear about them when some high-ranking official says this is what we're going to do. So the country doesn't even have a sort of a national development plan, which everybody's familiar with, and we understand when we're going to need what cash flows and develop whatever. The fact we should have known, I think it is basic foreign policy analysis, that we should have known the second we put those blocks up for auction, given the fines that we had before, that we were going to attract a reaction from Venezuela. That's basic. I think that's rudimentary. Secondly, in our analysis, if there was going to be a reaction from Venezuela, we should have analyzed what were the worst case scenarios and best case scenarios for their reaction, simply because Venezuela has always said that this is their territory and there should be no investment. Thirdly, I think just before the APNU came into office, APNU-FC came into office, there was a proposal from another high-ranking or a high-ranking official of the then government that Venezuela be given a corridor in the offshore waters, which is in effect a concession of some of the offshore territory of Guyana. So all of that would have fed into the analysis, and the question would have been simply this: if there is no need to put these blocks up on auction now, in other words, the country is not in an economic crisis. We're not trying to raise emergency funds, and that the sums that we are likely to raise from this were not likely to be significant. Why are we doing it, given the risks? I'm not saying that for a second that we should surrender our claim to the territory, but why are you doing this to provoke a reaction? And now that you have got the reaction, and the reaction has reached the extent to which it has, which we should have anticipated when we were doing our analysis, what is our plan? We should have had a plan since then. If we were going to put these blocks, if we took the decision, we're putting these oil blocks up for sale, what is our defensive mechanism in the event that Venezuela behaves in the way in which we anticipate it is? And that would have included, I assume, a very aggressive a very aggressive diplomatic effort throughout all our friends and throughout the entire United Nations to say and reassert our our entitlement to that territory, but also to educate the international community about the spurious claims of Venezuela. On Monday, before I left the country, I attended the opening of the Africa Exim Bank. The president spoke, and never once was this raised. We had an audience with, I can't remember, several ministers from foreign countries. Miss Motley arrived. She was the one who recently facilitated the agreements between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. And not once was this issue raised. We lost that opportunity to even tangentially mention the fact that there was an unjust claim for more than half of our country. So I think this, if to answer your question in a word, there's no doubt that the auctioning of those blocks with absolutely no preparation on our part for the potential consequences is what triggered this. And now we have to live with the consequences.
We have to live with the consequences. Nigel Hughes here, prominent Guyanese attorney at law and former chairman of the Alliance for Change. Of course, Mr. Hughes is well respected in Guyana and wider afield across the Caribbean region. Nigel, look, I know you said that Prime Minister Motley is a friend of the government, but I understand she's a good friend of yours too. Recently, the Prime
No, but
Minister,
I'm not sure. I'd like to disabuse your mind of that. I'm not sure where you get that
well,
from.
I understand that. I know that you are on talking terms. She knows you exist. You know that she exists and that you would have been in her presence on a number of occasions at home and
Yeah,
in
that doesn't make you
Barbados.
good friends, but yes, of course. But
Well, and I am tending to agree with your position here in terms of foreign governments being reluctant. I mean, you didn't really say that, but in future we may experience foreign governments being reluctant to give us the support like they did during the period of Burnham and Jagan and so on. Mia Motley pronouncing on the issue, Prime Minister Mia Motley pronouncing on the issue, said she hopes there's peace in the region, but she did not render any support for Guyana against Venezuela. She did not condemn or spoke out against what is happening. Troops going to amassing their things at the borders and so on. What do you gather from that?
well, two things. One is let's just look back maybe about 12 years ago. When Venezuela started to use its influence as a result of its monetary advantage um, as a result of the exploitation of oil, they started the Petro-Carib deal throughout the Caribbean, where they were giving credit. for you're going to get Venezuelan oil at below market prices. You will remember that several of the Caribbean countries signed on to that deal. Now, it meant that they automatically were going to be in the debt of Caracas. We even had we had the rice for um, for fuel deal, and so Venezuela very shrewdly used its economic influence at that time literally to shut off most of the Caribbean in terms of influence as a result of using their petrodollars to say, look, we will give you petrol, which you need to run your country. We know that your balance of payments are in trouble. And that buys a certain level of influence. What it will probably do in CARICOM is it certainly will mute any sort of opposition to Venezuela. And they
Wow.
anticipated going forward that this Guyana situation was going to become an issue. I don't think it's any secret that Guyana had oil. Mr. Burnham said they had it there, but they never announced it. They found it. When you put that with, or you marry that with the statements, it's quite often what is not said that is important. And then I think in the case of Prime Minister Mia Mottley, is what she did not say.
That's it.
So she talks about peace, but she doesn't talk about justice. And she didn't talk about the rule of law. She didn't talk about respecting international treaties that were arrived at. All of those were silent. There was just a question of peace. That was the only aspect upon
Aspect.
which she spoke. And there were very many other areas you would expect your friends to comment favorably or in support of you on. For example, respecting boundaries, respecting international arbitration. The 1899 arbitration is still valid. She said nothing about that. She lent no support to that. All she said is she hopes it's peaceful. No. What does peaceful mean? That Venezuela walks in and takes it over and we decide we're not going to fight a sort of terrorist campaign. What does it mean that Venezuela is in crisis and therefore we allow more Venezuelans to come in undocumented until they literally swarm our population and they're perhaps more than 50% of the population? What exactly does peace mean? And in those circumstances, particularly in an organization that is as, forgive me for saying this, as fragile because of its size as CARICOM, in international foreign relations, and I'm not talking about the great work they've done, but certainly in terms of its size, who are we leaning on in the context? Venezuela has had a very pro third world, pro development of working peoples in the third world, peoples who were previously oppressed. So it has built up, even within the third world, significant diplomatic influence because of the positions it's adopted. We have been sleeping at the board. We used to be leading that during the old days. You know that Mr. Burnham and other people led that sort of diplomatic effort. We had people like Walter Rodney who spoke about Europe under development Africa, and Guyana was considered a leader in terms of progressive thought. We've surrendered that position, and I think perhaps Venezuela not has replaced that, but they certainly have significant influence. And again, I am very worried about when Venezuela comes back on board, assuming Mr. Maduro does everything that Washington wants him to do. When you look at Venezuela's resources versus Guyana's resources, not only in oil, in terms of people, in terms of influence, in terms of relations in Latin America, when you put both of those in the scale, is Guyana still going to be as important? Because you know, international countries, and the Americans have always made this very clear, you have no permanent friends.
Permanent
Nobody has permanent
interests.
friends. You have permanent interests. And
Wow.
when you put the interest of Venezuela back on, back in the fold, producing the largest amount of oil, the largest reserves, very friendly with Washington, and you balance that against Guyana, friendly with Washington with significantly smaller oil resources, but more importantly, less than a million people. How are we diplomatically navigating that world? And that's my concern. I mean, the interim tactical moves, amassing the border and stuff. very concerning.
Well, is there
But
any intention to even navigate that world by the current government that we have? You know, and I want us to. I'm sorry to cut you. Finish the point. But
no, 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 no.
I have to
I think
ask you
I've
because
said it.
you know you speak intellectually
Well, I
at
mean,
a lot of times, and you a lot of times you raise the bar, and you spoke about that intellectual devoid that we have since the Rodney period and so on. I think personally, and I will register in this program, that you can fill that gap on behalf of Guyana. I think that you
so what gap
are
is that?
the intellectual
No, no,
capacity of
no,
Rodney
no.
and others.
No,
But
no.
but
Coming back to let's come back
go
to what
ahead.
we're
Yeah.
dealing with
No,
here.
but you
No,
mentioned it. You said there has been that sort of divide, and Venezuela is getting a lot of you know, Venezuela is not getting the flack that they got during the Burnham period and so on. That is very clear. You have given us a dismal outlook of a future for Guyana within the context of this controversy that is quite frightening. And I believe that we have to have the sort of leadership very quickly that will be able to push back that frightening, eventuality. And there's when I will ask you the question a bit later about your direct intervention, if there is to be one. But Nigel, let's get back to the position. Our local politics in dealing with this controversy. Let us be. I know you deal at an intellectual level, but let's go a bit layman at the moment, because people want to hear radical views and down to earth views that can say to them that we have leaders in Guyana that can confront the PPP regime and its mishandling of a lot of our interests in Guyana. Well, Amanzo Walton Desir, who is a member of parliament, who's a member of the National Assembly in Guyana, went live yesterday. And she spoke about Jagdio's direct, involvement in undermining, in allegedly undermining our sovereignty. Let us go to this clip before you pronounce on the question I ask you.
European UFC of promoting xenophobic acts, Barry Jagdeo must come out immediately and repudiate that video if it is not true, because this is not a laughing matter. This is serious business. This is very, very serious business. You cannot ask us to work with you in one sphere and then behind our backs, you take the opportunity to score cheap political points. It cannot be tolerated. It cannot be tolerated. And so he must be made to repudiate the video. He must be made to say why he would sit in a forum and promote such nonsense. Because I want y'all to understand something. The APNU AFC represents 49% of Guyanese. We don't just sit in the parliament because we, want to say that we represent 49% of the Guyanese. And to the degree that you would allege that the APNU is promoting xenophobic acts against migrants is the degree to which you are literally allowing foreign elements to be inserted into our domestic politics. And not only that, you are literally making 50% of Guyanese, not APNU, AFC or whomever, but Guyanese, you are literally making 50% of them a scapegoat in your grand scheme of things. So what is becoming apparent here is that Barry Jagdeo is not interested in unity or a united approach. But let me make it very clear, because the opposition has been very, very clear about this. Our politics ends at the border. When it comes to confronting an external threat, we will stand united. And so what exactly is this about? It could only be that Barry Jagdeo sees this as an opportunity, one, to get involved in the usual petty politics that he's involved in, and two, he believes that he needs the Venezuelan vote to continue in power. Barry Jagdeo understands that Guyanese, whether you're AFC, APNU, PNC, PPP, are fed up of him.
That that was Amanzo Walton, PNCR MP. Nigel, when you listen to Amanzo, I know that you have had a history with Barajagdio. I know personally that he made a public statement saying that you will never, once he has anything to do with it, you will never be a chief counsel in Guyana. You are aware that most of Guyana's problems, I think you are aware that most of Guyana's problems is as a result of Mr. Jagdio's involvement at the echelons of our politics. And I want you to be very candid today because this is where our conversation will veer off. I feel comfortable and satisfied that you have spoken out on the Venezuela issue satisfactorily. But I want to ask you, within the context of what Ms. Walton said, what are your views about Barajagdio, about in relation to this controversy, in relation to his de facto leadership of Guyana and the way we are heading?
Knowing that there are a lot of statements you made in there that I assume one would have to take as accurate if I were to answer them. But I want to perhaps deal with this at the level that I would prefer to deal with it, which is this. Guyana has no alternative than to be united internally and united externally when it is confronting this claim by Venezuela. Absolutely no alternative. It means each and every one of us must behave responsibly when addressing this issue. The difficulties that we have internally in Guyana, which are essentially issues of race, have been with us since 1950s. We have never admitted them, and because we have never admitted them, we have never confronted them. So we have serious fault lines. I don't believe that we are a nation state, but that's a separate issue. Where you're going to have a senior politician clearly attempting to inject into our international difficulties the racial differences between us and how we treat the nationals of a foreign country that is one in its own domestic economic crisis, but at foreign level is at its most pernicious and aggressive. And you attempt to suggest if what this Venezuelan man says is true, and I do want to enter that caveat. This man said he met with someone, and so I don't know if he did. But in the event that what he says is remotely accurate, it is the most dangerous attempt to inject into what is a national crisis our great fault lines along the line of race. I think Mr. Zier was very polite and gracious. Political differences in Guyana are essentially, at the end of the day, they come down to racial differences because the two main parties are supported, their core is essentially based in race. And where you are going to suggest to the citizens of the country, which is at an international level claiming half of your country, that they must be wary of and cautious about half of your population, that is a most dangerous and frightening perspective.
Is it tantamount to treason?
Allow me. I don't know if it's treason or it's not, but what I will say is it will have an impact, especially in a country where the armed forces are predominantly one race. It will have an impact. Treason is a legal concept that is used to silence people who you politically don't agree with. We've had several people, Mark Benchop. We've had Oliver Hinkson charged with sedition. We had those two people I defended whose names escape me, Carol and her husband, who were charged with treason. That's a political offense. What we have here is this is dangerous, dangerous development. I haven't heard a single member of any civil society grouping or individual remotely condemn any attempt by any politician to use the division that we have as a basis for suggesting these people who may be economic migrants, some of them may not be, as a basis for pushing this level of xenophobia. This is a critical point. And Venezuela, looking on with superior foreign resources as they have, with a diplomatic corps that is much better funded than ours, will pick it up. And it is yet another fault line. Because what happens? I think it was yesterday, I think the Prime Minister said to the OAS that Venezuela plans to issue passports to the Guyanese who are in Essequibo. What is our defense to that? And more importantly, what happens when they start to do that? What are we doing about that? At what level are we going to intervene? And if so, what is going to be the nature of our intervention? The National Assembly, which was supposed to meet tomorrow, is now meeting on Monday, which is the one place that you can at least attempt to send a message of unanimity to Venezuela. You now have half of that National Assembly, Ms. Walton's party and the AFC, having to deal with what has just been referred to by so articulately by Ms. Walton. That you're saying half the population is xenophobic about the Venezuelans and you want us to provide a united front? This is a piece of cake if I was the foreign minister of Venezuela to deal with. Propaganda here would be tremendous in Essequibo.
Mr. Jagdio, I believe, Mr. Hughes, is a very shrewd politician. You said that to me once. And I didn't agree with you. I agree with you now. He's a very shrewd politician. I think he's a very wicked politician too. But the point is this, Mr. Jagdio's strategy is to maintain power. It's to keep the opposition out. It's to maintain power. And he would sell his soul to the devil if he doesn't have any opposition. He would sell his soul to the devil to maintain power. And I believe strongly that the opposition is playing into the PPP's hand and into Mr. Jagdio's hand. I said, Nigel, that I said a few weeks ago that we must maintain a position in which we let our supporters know that though we are patriotic and though we are representing our nation's sovereignty, and we will give a show of unity in that context, that we must not be seen as an opposition that can be called by the PPP to sit down with them at their behest for political currency. We can go to the parliament where we represent our people, but for the PPP to call us into a room at their behest to say we show unity, I think it was a fundamental mistake and a betrayal to our people. Miss Walton came out and she spoke about what happened. It was expected that the PPP would walk back on anything they said to the opposition because they are a mortal enemy of the opposition. How can you go sit with the government that doesn't care about half of our population, that happens to be AP and UAFC supporters and other supporters of other groups? How can you sit down with the PPP now, come now to say to us that Jagdio subsequently held meetings denouncing and giving you a bad name. Wouldn't it have been better to say, Mr. Hughes, that we released a statement, we call for we demand an urgent meeting in Parliament to discuss this issue. We will unite on it, but we must let the world know that there are problems in Guyana with the opposition and the government because of its treatment of opposition supporters and the opposition in the whole. Nigel, I don't understand if we have an opposition leadership that is geared to confront Mr. Jagdeo's leadership in the People's Progressive Party. Ms. Walton said that she wrote "You Thought." Is that real politic? Utah is a creature of Barra Jagdeo. Any letter Utah receives, he has to call Barra for guidance. Can we let our people know the real politic that is happening in Guyana? Than for politicians put a suit on and deal at a level in which they give us the impression that we are dealing, at a higher level. I understand, Mr. Hughes, that you may return to politics.
Okay, before you go there,
Yeah.
you've used some very, very strong language that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with. You've spoken about acts of betrayal because they met with the government on this issue. I am long retired from politics, but and it's not for me to criticize the political tactics adopted. But what I will say is that the options available to the opposition were limited in the face of a crisis, an external crisis. It is not an option for them to be even remotely seen to be playing domestic politics when they have a crisis. I want to just leave an example with you. Before the attack by Hamas on the Israelis and the Israeli reaction, Israel was going through the most serious challenge internally to the way in which the society is to be governed. Mr. Netanyahu was about to introduce legislation to curtail the privileges insofar as certain things are concerned. And there were huge protests, 10, 15, 20, 30,000 Israelis. These are Jews protesting. Hamas attacks Israel, and there is a response from Israel. What is the Israeli response? Mr. Netanyahu, backed by an extreme right-wing coalition of parties, forms a national government for the purpose of dealing with their immediate crisis.
Yes.
This is a leader who is extreme right and whose coalition partners are even further to the right. And when the nation state of Israel and the Jews in particular were attacked, even though the week before they had the most acerbic, the most acute of difficulties about the future of Israel, he found it necessary for the preservation of Israel to form a government of national unity so that they could address what they considered their common enemy. That, I believe, is what people do when nation states are threatened. He didn't resort to attacking the left wing in Israel. As a matter of fact, and this perhaps is the most appropriate example, he attempted in one of his speeches to suggest that the Israeli intelligence agencies were at fault for not picking up what Hamas intended to do. And by the time he had finished the sentence, he was condemned by everybody, including his colleagues that were to the right of him politically, saying, "You do not address this issue now. We will deal with any breaches that Israel intelligence might have had." And that is the sign of a real politician, and that is the sign, perhaps, of leadership. Guyana, we're the exact reverse. In the face of Venezuela's aggression, we have decided to play domestic politics, which in effect is race politics, And
No,
all
we
that
haven't. The
does.
PPP, you have to speak to this
No,
issue.
when I
Oh,
say
I don't
we,
want
I'm
the.
talking about
It
we
is
Guyanese.
no. I am saying to you, sir, with all due respect, I want you to speak today because this is not the opposition that done that. The opposition, out of goodwill, even though I condemned the move to sit down with the PPP on on their grounds to give a show of unity. I did not say we should not make a show of unity. I said that we released a statement and other things. That was enough. But for the PPP to call us, to use us, knowing the nature of the PPP, I did not know that Barjagdia would have done that 2 weeks later.
But
But
hold on,
Nigel, I
Mr. Brown,
want you to.
allow me, just allow me. If you are in politics, as I think you are, you, in your assessment of what your opponents are likely to do, will come up with a range of possibilities. I do not think that anybody who seriously has assessed the actions of Mr. Jagdeo would have not been in a position to predict that that would have been his response. I mean, Norman, really, if you're suggesting
But
that
then
that was
Nigel,
beyond, no, if you are saying as a politician that that was beyond your anticipation, then perhaps you didn't take into account all the evidence that you have.
I was saying that I was being very, very ironic because I was saying that because the opposition was supposed to anticipate that. In fact, I said that we should
Yeah,
not have
but
sat
okay,
down with them.
let's
But
stop right there. If they anticipated it, are you suggesting that they should not have done what they did?
I
The
am
country is at risk. The country is at risk.
but our people under the PPP is at more risk, Mr. Hughes. The PPP is doing more hurtful things to the Guyanese people than Venezuela has done.
I
But hold
accept
on a
all
minute,
of that.
sir. With all due respect, and this program is like that, we can project. Nigel, I'm saying this and I'm being very pellucid. We are aware of the severity of the PPP's evil towards African Guyanese. You name something that they have not done to us directly or indirectly, and I would put my hands up. Right? The point I'm making is this: we have an elections in 2025. We intend to see the removal of a PPP regime that has no interest in unity, no interest in developing Guyana in its entirety, no interest in bringing the races together. I think we're clear on that position. Wouldn't it have been a wise move for us to say, we will sit with you in Parliament to discuss this unity or to forge this unity? We have released a statement, but we have our people to look at, and we know that they're being trampled on. We know that they're suffering. We cannot go into your lair and sit with you as if we're school children being asked to agree. What that turned out to be, Mr. Hughes, is a PR stunt because not later than 2 weeks, Mr. Jagdeo went out there and called a meeting excluding the opposition, allegedly with Venezuelan migrants and so on, to say that these people are no good, they're xenophobic, and so on. So the reality is there. The reality is there. I feel that Mrs. Walton coming out yesterday was some sort of hypocritical move. She should have apologized to the Guyanese people.
Can I'm not
I'm
retained by Miss
sorry,
Walton, so
yeah,
no. But allow me to perhaps
yeah.
you're clearly strong opposition is on tactics. It's not on principle. You cannot say that the principle that was adopted by the opposition parties, which is to stand for Ghana, was at fault. What seems to be your concern here is the tactics, whether the tactic of going into the government offices or wherever it is to discuss this issue um, was not sending the wrong signal given the demonstrated history of discrimination by
I
the
agree with
government
you.
against the people. So, but That's just a tactical difference, my friend. That's not a principle difference. And you're saying rather than go and meet them, they should meet in the National Assembly. That's a tactic. The principle, and this is where I don't believe we can find fault with the opposition. The opposition's principled position is after all the insults and injuries that their supporters have suffered, when the country of Guyana is threatened, they maintain a principled position that the country ought to be defended by its best and brightest, and that unity in the face of external aggression is going to be demonstrated. I don't want to get into an argument about the tactics, and I think I would urge you to reconsider that a lot of the energy that you are presently spending expressing your disappointment with the tactic needs to be put in the context of the principle. The opposition has acted morally. No, and correctly. If you say that a political leader of the government goes behind their back or in front of their faces, one, I don't think it was unanticipated. Two, that is not to the detriment of the opposition. That is to the detriment of the conduct of the government, because everybody, including Venezuela, sees that the high-ranking decision makers of the present government, despite the decisions they may make internationally, are prepared to use that subject for the purpose of further dividing their people. And all that does is it says to your enemies that you are fighting a weak country that is divided. That is not the fault of the opposition. If Guyana gets defeated, and history analyzes it, it is not whether or not the opposition went to meet with them at Freedom House or went to meet them at the government office. It is the fact that a government official, by his actions, led to further division and lack of, how do I put this kindly, lack of commitment of its people to defend the territory, which clearly the government of the day thinks should be defended. I think you need to perhaps look at this again in its context.
But Mr.
I
Hughes,
don't
I
think
hear you. I hear you.
anything that government officer said was
I
unanticipated.
hear you.
Uh,
But I will not accept that advice. I'll tell you why. I've been in politics for
no,
more
it
than
wasn't
30
advice.
years.
Let me make it clear. It
Yeah.
wasn't
But
advice.
let me say
It was
this to you.
just
Let me say
my
this to you.
analysis.
Let me say this to you before we move on. Let me say this to you clearly. Politics is about perception. Politics is not about principle, especially in the Guyana context. It's about perception. It's not about principle. You show me a principled politician anywhere in this world, and I will put my hands up. Right? Politics is about getting, by any means necessary, where you want to be.
Yeah,
And then you can
but
hold on, then you can walk
no,
back, then you can
Norman.
walk back in time and correct that. But
No,
hold on,
no,
Nigel, let me just finish because I'll give you an
no, but you're
opportunity to talk.
contradicting yourself.
No, but
You're
the point
contradicting
I'm
yourself.
making to you is this. If politics is about perception, I'm not contradicting myself. I am saying that the opposition would have been on better ground to say, and this is not only a tactic, this is saying to the people who have suffered tremendously in your
And continue to
constituencies
draw suffer.
and
And
continue
continue
to say to
to
them
suffer.
that we do not have a problem with uniting with the government to show that we believe in the preservation of our sovereignty. What we will not be doing is being called by you conveniently where you want us to sit outside of the National Assembly for this show of unity. That is a point. That is politics. To do that is to say to your people that you're giving credence to an installed regime that has no interest in your longevity, no interest in those whom you represent, and so on. And if the opposition had said, we are releasing a statement, we stand with the government as we would stand with any government, to protect our sovereignty. We demand of this government that though all is not well with us, that we will meet in the National Assembly where our people know we are equals. But you can't call me, Mr. Hughes, with all your intellectual positions, and I respect it. You can't call me in a world of real politics where we have a problem, where I know that you don't mean well, and you tell me, come by your house, let me have coffee, and show the world that we united. I will not accept it, Mr. Hughes. You're one of the most brilliant minds in Guyana,
No,
but I
no,
have to speak to you down to earth. Look,
no,
let's move
no,
on.
man, no, man. No, no. Let me just clarify
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
Your position is very clear on this on this issue, and my position is very clear.
I
So
and
let's agree to differ on the approach. I don't
good.
think the opposition erred. I think you could say it's a tactical misstep, but I don't think from a principled position. But we have a
A
difference in this.
tactical
So
misstep is an error. So, but let's move on, Nigel. I want to press you a bit more about Barajagde because you're using very diplomatic, you know, positions to deal with this issue. And I want to put you on the spot about Barajagde. There aren't many Guyanese leaders that can confront Mr. Jagdeo effectively and efficiently. I believe that strongly. I think let me retract that. I think they are capable of doing that, but I think that they're unwilling for whatever reason, to put a stop from the position of opposition to that madness that is being perpetrated by Mr. Jag during Guyana's politics. You understand? I think there's been an unwillingness. It's not that they're unable. So I want to ask you a question directly. For the sake of our viewers and the sake of posterity, this program will remain forever. What is your view of Mr. Jagdeo currently in politics? What is your view of Mr. Jagdeo's politics within the Guyana Venezuela border controversy? And what is your view of Mr. Jagdeo remaining in politics, given how dangerous it is for a section of Guyanese?
all right. First of all, I prefer to deal with principles and policies rather than individuals. So um, I am reluctant to go deal with Mr. Jagdeo as an individual, but I will say this. Every citizen, you, Mr. Jagdeo, everybody who is a Guyanese citizen, you have a right to be in politics. It's not a favor. If you elect to go into political matters, you have a right to advocate your position. The fact that the position you advocate might be adverse to the interests of significant parts of the population, it's for them to decide what they're going to do. Now, there are political figures that have tremendous influence over various parts of the community. If you are a person that has that level of influence, you have a level of responsibility. But if you believe that your tactics and your philosophy and your ideology, even though it may be hostile and adverse to the interests of other persons in the population, that is your position, go ahead and do it. It is a sign, perhaps, of the fact that the people who are at the other end, both the receiving end and the opponents, don't address you in the same manner in which you have addressed them. That perhaps is a feeling on their part. But I certainly don't think that it is for me to say that any individual should not get into politics. I certainly think that in terms of the effect and the consequences of the policies of the party that has been in power for most of the period from 1992 to now is concerned, the policies that have been adopted by them and enforced by them, whoever the architect may be, are particularly pernicious to the African population. The African population has been rather compliant and muted in their responses to what clearly are policies that are extremely hostile to their interests. It is for their political leadership to decide how they will confront those issues. That is the challenge. I don't want to get into what Mr. Jagdeo said. Mr. Jagdeo said many things, and he says many things about many people. I don't think that the issue can come down to personality, just as how I don't think that you can analyze the history of Guyana between 64 and 85 when Mr. Burnham died in terms only of Mr. Burnham. It's not Mr. Burnham. It's a question of how did what the policies we adopted affected the government. And allow me just to give you one example.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing Mr. Burnham said about economic development and the policies to be pursued for economic development can really be faulted. You have food security. Feed, clothe, and house yourself is about personal security or
Yes.
national security. You can't challenge that. You might not like how Mr. Burnham went about it, but you can't challenge that as a principle. Similarly, when you look at what happened to the Guyana dollar, is that we had two great bumper crops. I think it was 73 and 74 in sugar. Might be wrong in the years. But then OPEC came and took the bottom out of our economy. That's not a Burnham problem. That's just a fact. What we also have to take into account that when Mr. Burnham said he was going to nationalize sugar, nationalize bauxite, that was supported by the entire leadership in the National Assembly. So how are we going to begin to have an analytical discussion about that era and limit it to the personality Burnham when we should be dealing with the principles and policies that he perhaps brought into place? And I don't really want to, forgive me, spend a lot of my time discussing Mr. Jagdeo. It is what the policies of the PPP have done and the impact on African people in the rest of
And
the
I
country.
agree with you, Nigel. I agree with you in principle. But the ordinary man in the street in Guyana who will have to go out to vote to bring a change understands and they say that Jagdeo is the problem. And they're hoping that a leader can arise that will confront Mr. Jagdeo, because in confronting Mr. Jagdeo, you're confronting the PPP. But I get your intellectual position. I get the principle that you're bringing, and I have to agree. You're no ordinary person, man. I can't,
I am
sit down
exceedingly
in a
ordinary,
no,
my
but
friend.
I can't sit down at a forum with you and be cross-examined and come out unscathed. But the thing is this, right? You are brilliant. You're absolutely brilliant.
I'm
But
not.
but
No.
brilliance sometimes cause a people to suffer for a very long time because we have a man who goes down to the nitty gritty, who picks up
But
an alien like critic and said, I will make you a man who is, this man is dealing with real politics. There isn't a leader that can go down into the gutters to confront him. And therein, I find a problem with our politics. So the next 25 years, we could be talking about this because Mr. Jagdeo is a step ahead, using any means necessary to maintain power. Nigel Hughes,
can I
we are up.
can I
Yeah,
beg to
yeah,
differ?
yeah. Go ahead, man. You got time. You got time.
No, no, no. Let's understand this. This comes down to choice. If you are going to confront whoever the political leader is and wherever he wants to go, gutter or otherwise, you have to make sure that you present an alternative which people have confidence in. You provide information that demonstrates the capacities and the proclivities of that person. I attempted to start doing that with the award of contracts and bringing information. You have to do that by disaggregated data. And at the end of the day, if the Guyanese population says, well, we like the gutter behavior, we like this and we like that, who am I to say otherwise? And I just want to make sure that I make this clear. I am not in politics, Norman. So
Well,
it's not for me to do anything. It's not, the burden is not on my
but
shoulders. I
hold
don't
on, Nigel. I have integrity, and I think that if I have a discussion with you before this program to say that we're dealing with Venezuela, I understand that there is room that you are to re-enter politics prominently. But I said to you that I don't want to talk. But if you give me the permission to question you, I will.
you
Other
can
than
question me
that,
on
no,
whatever you
no,
want.
no, no, no. But if you
I'm
give,
giving
because
you
I
the
don't want to be.
permission. I'm giving you the possession, the
Nigel
permission.
Hughes, we
I have no
understand.
secret
We
problems.
understand that the U.S. is looking at regime change, at the next elections. We understand that. I got information from people very high up that your name is at the top of the list to assume the presidency of Guyana in 2025. I understand that your name is on top of the list, that there has to be regime change. They don't believe that the opposition can win an election by itself, and they believe that a broad coalition will do that, and that the leader that will go to the elections as a presidential candidate must come from that broad coalition. Now, I'm saying to you factually that your name, is at the top of what I have heard to be the next president of Guyana. Are you aware of that? And
No,
would
I
you
have
and would
absolutely.
you accept that if approached?
Those are two easy questions. One, I am not aware of any such development remotely or even by some sort of anyway. I want to make that absolutely clear. Two, several things that you have said there caused me pause to worry. The people of Guyana at the end of the day have to decide who they want.
Yeah.
Not the Americans. It's the people of Guyana that have to decide who they want. Three, one of the assumptions you've made is that you can ever have a coalition of interest that will win in elections where you have the PPP and the PNC. It ain't happening. Their core votes are so significant that you will not end up with any coalition government unless one of them is in that coalition. So to think that you're going to somehow create a third party that is going to win an election, absolutely not. And to your final question, whether I am remotely interested, absolutely not. I
But
left
yeah,
politics in
you're
2016. I left politics. I'm making a categorical statement. I left politics in 2016. I have no plan to return to
you
politics.
have no
Period.
plan. You have
None.
no plan. But if you are approached and the
And I,
circumstances
those plans,
demand,
no, those plans apply to whether I was approached or not. My plans are going into politics. Got nothing to do with who approaches me.
so at the
I have
last
no plan.
at the last minute, if the people of Guyana repose confidence in you to say which
But how
we
do,
want Nigel to
but
run,
Norman, you think of what you're saying. How do people of Guyana can repose confidence? By what means?
they
You want
could
any
say
reference?
we
Oh,
need
come on.
Nigel Hughes to be the next leader of the opposition
No, but how
or
are you doing that?
the next
It's,
presidential candidate. Our America, oh look, America can do whatever they want to do, and we're serious about this. If America wants regime change, they will have regime change in Guyana.
so we don't need elections. We should then just ask the
No,
Americans
it
who
will
should
be
be.
true in elections, but it will be manipulated. Let's be honest. Nigel,
But
look,
but Norman, you're contradicting yourself. If you're saying that the elections will be manipulated by the Americans, why are we having this discussion? Is the question who the Americans want to
because
manipulate or
because the
so
question is within the context of the American choosing somebody that is very prominent in Guyana to lead. My position, why I'm not contradicting myself, because the candidate I am looking at that I will support is someone that is down in the grassroots, that is capable of confronting the PPP, capable of winning the majority of Guyanese who are poor Guyanese and capable of pushing back the hegemonic nature and actions of the People's Progressive Party. So I'm not contradicting myself. Nigel, before we wrap up, I want you to listen to this brief clip and respond to it, and I will ask you for your closing remarks.
To play politics against us. And we are going to respond. And they respond. They say they're calling a referendum. They're massing troops on our borders. No, those things may not come to anything tomorrow. But the fact of the matter, the massing of troops there may make our population say, wait a minute, is it the right thing we are doing? They're massing of troops and they're threatening to go to a referendum, not threatening, going to a referendum, can chase away investors. All right? No, the Venezuelans doesn't have to invade us. They can use the threat, chase away investors, destabilize our population, meaning make people in our society say, oh shit, we should not have brought these Americans in. We should not have exploited this oil. They're creating doubts in the minds of our people. So when we are making policy, we have to take into consideration the competing demands of the various groups in Guyana. We have to take into consideration the investors by the big countries, and we have to take into consideration Venezuela. And I don't think this government understands that. No. So Venezuela has to behave in that way for our government to wake up and to realize how serious the threat of Venezuela is. And it still does not realize. No, the Venezuelan opposition and government don't like each other. They behave as mortal enemies. On this issue, they're finding common ground. What the hell is our government doing in terms of common ground in our own country?
Well, I think not. Sorry about that bit of delay there, Nigel. You heard Dr.
No
David
problem.
Hines there, professor at Arizona State University, a Guyanese politician, a leader of the Working People's Alliance. What are your views on what Dr. Hines said?
What aspect of what he said? I think
All of
he
it.
essentially, well, he said essentially that our capacity to analyze all the important aspects of the Guyana-Venezuela border needs to include our analysis of the Venezuelans' position. I mean, he said several things there, but I'm not sure specifically what aspect of it you
I
want
think
to
his view
respond
is
to.
quite radical. I think his view is quite radical in terms of
In what way?
looking at the PPP and what it is doing within the context of national governance and within the context of handling our border issue with Venezuela. And there will be views, and I will be interviewing others to get their views. But Dr. Hines was quite clear that the PPP under Barajagdio's intention in the entire interview, not in that clip, it was very clear that the intention of Jagdio and the PPP is to destabilize Guyana, is to destabilize Guyana. And he was very
Yeah,
outspoken and
let me.
frank.
Yeah, I hear you on that. But then destabilize Guyana. Then what happens after that? To what end?
To what end? But he's saying to you that
Guyana is already, I mean, unstable. If you think of what happens today, I mean, let's look at the data. Look at what's happening economically to the African people, and what does that say about the future of the African people? If you put most of the economic resources into one community, then in effect you're condemning those people who are not in that community to a very dismal future. That to me is extremely destabilizing. I mean, it creates its own incentive regime, doesn't it? So when you say the PPP want to destabilize it, I'm asking what form of destabilization,
well,
because I think a lot of their policies.
The PPP, by their actions, can allow Venezuela, that can cause, sorry, Venezuela to invade us. I think you made that clear. You made an analogy with Israel and so on, and how they united. The PPP is not doing that, and I think that's why you underscore the point that with Hamas and them, they the Jews and they were united, though they were at loggerheads a day or two before. They were united because of a common cause that threatened their sovereignty and their existence and their peace. Guyana is not that, and it has been very clear by the hand of Barajagdio and the actions of Barajagdio that the disrespect for the opposition was very profound, and it's sad. It's very sad. But I
No, man.
got your point, Nigel. I got your
Can I
point.
ask you a question?
I don't want
How
you to
do
be.
you get me to respect you? By complaining that I don't respect you, or making you wake up and realize that you have to respect me? Which one?
I would get someone who disrespects me and by extension disrespecting those who I represent nationally in a country, I would get them to give that respect by removing them, by confronting them radically. Desmond Hoyt was president of Guyana. And
Yeah, but
Desmond,
you've answered your own question, haven't you? Haven't you just
Nigel, I
answered
don't
your own
want you to be
question?
patronizing. I know you're brilliant, but I don't want you
No,
to
but
be
I'm saying
patronizing.
I'm not being
I am
patronizing.
an
Let
interviewer.
me disabuse you of that. I'm
Yeah.
saying to you, you're complaining about the disrespect, and I'm saying to you, from my single corner as Nigel Hughes, I'm not really concerned about whether people disrespect me. It's that there have to be consequences of your disrespect,
Respect. Yeah.
right?
I
And
wasn't talking
therefore,
about you. I was talking about the opposition. Go
no,
ahead,
no,
sorry.
I'm not talking about me. I'm not talking about. I'm just using that as an example. If there is a political party in office respecting the supporters of another political party and they have significant numbers, then there are several things they can do. One, to first capture their attention. Two, to focus their attention on what they're doing and how its adverse consequences. And three, to take such action as is necessary to ensure that what is perceived as a disrespect comes to an immediate end.
And
You have enough examples in the world. You think that the ANC went to Mr. Botha and said, Mr. Botha, please, you're disrespecting us. You have to change. No, it didn't happen. And it certainly wasn't Mr. Mandela sitting down out in Robben Island. So I don't know why you think that we are without solutions. There was an economic boycott of South Africa. There was internal dissensions. There were strikes. There were actions that were intended to disrupt the apartheid regime in South Africa. It took a while, but we have to understand that things take a while. Nothing is instant. No success is immediate.
how
And all
long do
that
you
you
think this is going to take for Guyana to become a country that has a government that cares about all of its people, that has a government that believes in the upward mobility of the entire population? How long you think that would take? And you know, I ask you this question because it's a loaded question. Many would say, Mr. Hughes, on a serious level, many would say that if we have someone in Guyana that has the capacity and capability to stop the runaway train of hegemony, and they refuse to do that, that they are a part of that problem. Do you think there's anyone in Guyana? I'll let you speak. Go ahead. Just go ahead.
go
No,
ahead.
but Nigel
Then
Hughes, I will say this to you. I said you are not my favorite to lead Guyana. But I have never said,
but Norman,
no, no, hold
Norman,
on. I have never said that you are not the best person or that your
Norman, Norman.
capacity as, hold
Let
on
me
a man.
address. Let me address all your
I'm glad I
questions.
made you laugh. And
I
this is
have
what this show
no,
is
no.
about. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have no ambitions, zero ambitions to lead
But
Guyana.
why?
So
You're black,
whether you think I'm a candidate or not,
blacks,
whether I'm not your no,
blacks
no.
and poor Indians are suffering.
Let me learn.
Go ahead, sorry.
Whether you don't think that I am the best candidate or not is not even academic. It
No,
is
for
not.
me, for me, for me. I didn't
It's
say for,
not relevant. I
yeah.
don't have any interest at all in running Guyana. None.
But you don't have any. But Nigel, I hope that that you don't have to take back your words at the last minute. But the point is this, Nigel. I strongly believe that if there are two people in Guyana that I believe, if given leadership, that can effectively confront the wrongs of the PPP and perhaps take Guyana into a liberated state. And those two people are yourself and Simona Brooms. I honestly believe that, and that's and the comparison when you look at the two individuals, they're poles apart in other ways. But I strongly believe that if you assume the leadership, or if Simona Brooms assume the leadership, there will be change. What I said to you is that Simona Brooms is my
But your
favorite.
solution, but you have your solution. I am not intending to assume any leadership. So Go
So,
ahead
but
about
no,
it.
no, you are not in. But that's a, Nigel. If the opportunity presents itself and you're called upon, and the country needs you, will you say no by any means necessary? Is it this a foregone position that you don't want to become a leader to help Guyanese to save Guyana from a leader that we know yourself and Brooms can confront and stop to save a country? Are you saying that no matter what, if the people of Guyana come to you, all of them, half of the PPP supporters say no, what decide Nigel should be the person to bring this change because we fed up? Are you saying that by all means you will say to them no because I have no interest in getting into leadership? Is that what you're saying
All
to
right.
me?
Let me answer you first this way, and it's not a diplomatic answer. I have no inflated opinion of me or my capacities or my ability to lead the country. It doesn't even feature. I don't know the mechanisms by which quote unquote people will come, but where I sit, I will soon be 60, my friend. I believe that I have attempted as best as I can in my small way to contribute to changes in Guyana. I have done as best as I can, and this is a time for me to look at other things. And so
Okay.
I am not interested. I'm not
Sanky
interested.
White Sanky White in the comment section said this is a sparring that is enjoyable. So I think people are enjoying a little back and forth. Nigel, you haven't answered my question. And if I were cross-examining you in court, because you're so brilliant, you're such a brilliant legal
No,
mind
I'm not
that you
brilliant.
have not answered my question. I will
I've
ask you
just
one more
answered.
time. No, you
Just
haven't.
said to
You
you.
haven't answered it.
I have just said to you, Norman, that I am not interested in leading Guyana. I don't know how clear you want it than that.
You are not interested in leading Guyana doesn't mean that in the future, if the opportunity presents itself and there
Oh,
are circumstances that may force your your conscience that you would not lead Guyana. You're not interested doesn't mean you wouldn't. At this juncture, you're not interested. You are not
how could I
interested at this
become a
juncture.
yeah, but how could I become a disinterested leader? I don't understand that.
Also, you're saying,
If I'm not
let
interested,
me, well, honestly, I'll wrap up here with this point. I want to get this clear. I don't know how to do it. I know when you stand up in court, it is, you're a big guy and, but you would ask a question, and I want you to do something here on this program today because people are enjoying it. I want you to cross examine me as you in terms of that question. Now, I'm asking you to cross examine me as you with relation to that
you're
question
asking
of
me to
accepting
treat
the.
you as, yeah, but you're asking me to question you as if you were Nigel Hughes. Come on.
No, I'm asking you to ask the
Or-
question. I'm asking you to ask the question as if you're asking it to me, but the question is
okay.
yours.
So
But
you want me to
so
say,
you're saying that
okay,
you have
so
no
let me say
interest.
to you,
You have no
so the question
interest.
is, the question you want me to put to you is, Norman Brown, if you were called upon to lead this country, would you accept the invitation? That's
By
the
it.
question you want me to put to you?
No, man, don't do this to me, Nigeria. Here is the question. You have already said to me that you have no interest at this juncture, at this present juncture,
No, I didn't say at this juncture. I said I have
at
no
any
interest. I did not qualify it.
at any juncture, at any
I'm
juncture.
not, I'm not, Norman,
Oh,
I'm not playing smart. Said to you,
oh,
I have
at
no
any
interest.
juncture, at any juncture.
It would have to be extremely egregious circumstances to the national good that confronts the nation that I would consider being part of a leadership group for the country. It would have to be extreme circumstances, and
But
it would
there,
have to be a group, not
but
an individual.
but we are
It
living
wouldn't
in
be Nigel Hughes.
we living in extreme
No,
circumstances, and there are
we're
groups
not.
coming
We're
up.
not.
Yeah,
I
we
think
are.
that's an unfair. No, no, that's an unfair statement to the people sitting down in Gaza. We're in luxury right now.
I agree with that.
We
From an
okay.
international
So
context,
let's
from a
yeah.
global
Let's so
context, I
let's
agree. Nigel,
right.
listen, it has been a great pleasure having you for the first time on this program. I am an activist and I'm the host of this program, I strongly believe in liberation. I strongly believe in black people and poor Guyanese getting their just due. I think what is constant is that there has been a history where a large percentage of the population did not benefit from the nation, and they're not benefiting from the nation patrimony. It is worse today under the PPP regime. You have walked away from politics. You have no interest now in re-entering politics at this juncture. And so, I am a bit still worried that a solution has to be found, and that many great minds in Guyana are not ready to take the challenge. I will offer you the opportunity to give your closing remarks, and to add whatever you want to add. You have time to express, but we will wrap up after that.
I first of all, thank you for inviting me onto the program. I hope I have addressed all the issues you wanted to raise. I wish to applaud your activism on behalf of the people who are at the wrong end of the stick in Guyana. You have persistently been bringing to the forefront the issues that confront all Guyanese, and particularly African Guyanese. Um, I believe that your efforts should continue because it is an important part of our development of our country now, that these discussions that take place, whether tangentially speaking to each other or otherwise, they're absolutely necessary. Um, I thank you for affording me an opportunity to clarify several issues, not only in Venezuela, but in terms of my potential return to politics. Um, I'm happy that you've allowed me an opportunity to say the real issue that we should be looking at in Guyana in terms of Venezuela is, when Venezuela comes back online and is in full production, will we still have the same friends that we have now? And whether this is not the opportune moment for us to exploit our position, because, as you know, there are no permanent friends, just permanent interests. In relation to the ICJ, I would like to ensure that we collectively as a country, despite the fact of sabotage by political leadership of some of the parties, that we collectively identify the best people that we can, so that we first of all protect the integrity of Guyana, and then we can move on at a domestic level to sort our challenges out. And that, I think, should be the priority. As you know, I disagreed with you on the tactics that the opposition took by going to meet with the government, but we've agreed that, we don't have to share the same view on that. And I wish to take the opportunity finally to say to your viewers and those that have viewed this program that I believe that we are not without hope, but we have to be particularly forward-looking, and we have to bring our best analytical skills, because Guyana is at a very difficult time.
Nigel Hughes, I have to admit this before we wrap up. This is one of the very rare interviews that I had to bluff my way and put on a face and whatever, because I'm not going to go down under with such a brilliant legal mind and such a brilliant mind that we are fortunate to have in Guyana. And I say this to you. You are a
I thank you
giant.
for your
You are
gracious.
a giant.
I thank you for your
And
gracious
I
comments.
literally
No,
mean
no,
that. I did well. But
it wasn't a
in
competition.
no, but
Normally,
I
you
did
think
well.
about
I
it. It
done well,
wasn't.
but it wasn't. But I am saying to you, you can't tell me. You are a brilliant Guyanese. You are brilliant. You have principles, and you will not surrender those principles in the worst moments. And I gather that from how you handle the questions about Jagdio. You are far ahead of Barra Jagdio as a leader, and that you would not at any juncture bring yourself down to a degree where one must recognize that bad leadership is no leadership at all. And I respect you for that. I pushed you on that. And that is a characteristic that this nation will remember you for. You will not go down and compromise, you understand, what is important for the image of our country, for the image of our people, because of one man or two men who are creating havoc and reducing us to nothing. And I leave here with that knowledge that you are intact. Nigel Hughes, thank you very much for being here on this program, and I hope that you will return at some time in the future when you would have been called upon to take the mantle.
Well,
Thank you,
I will
Nigel.
only say to you, I will only say to you, Norman, in the light of that, this is our last program. Have a good
No,
time.
it will not be. Thank you very much, Nigel Hughes.
Good.
Nigel
Thank you.
Hughes there on Voice of the Diaspora. I think it was a beautiful program. His brilliance came through, and it was, I believe, a great conversation. I can't be Nigel, and Nigel can't be me. I'm an activist, but I believe that the message is sent. I believe that we have made another step to educate our people and to discuss the pertinent issues that are affecting Guyana, and in this case, the Guyana Venezuela controversy. It was a honor to have Mr. Hughes here on this program, and it's a honor to always have my viewers joining me here, to deal with the issues. Thank you very much for being on Voice of the Diaspora. Until next time, good evening.